Previously on The Outsider.
Tell me why you're here.
If Terry Maitland is innocent, we're not done.
No!
Were you dreaming about that mannequin?
He was here.
Did anything out of the ordinary happen?
Daddy got a cut.
It was a cut, and that was it. Do you think Terry Maitland killed that boy?
I really don't know.
All right. So, episode 3 of HBO's The Outsider. This episode is entitled Dark Uncle, which could have been about me, right? I'm an uncle and I am dark skinned, but no, it's not about me. I'm here, Kinte, with my wonderful co-host, the one and only Jeanne. How are you doing, Jeanne?
I am doing super good. Just as my very first observation for episode 3, this episode is where I think I first understood that the entire series was going to be a very slow kind of, I guess you call it a slow burn, and where I also sort of fell in love with Ralph. I can't say that I fell in love with him before, but I really fell in love with him after this episode. I felt like there was so much to his character, just absolutely way more than I ever expected to see. And a huge shout out to Ben Mendelsohn, who plays him, because I feel like it must have taken a lot to sort of get into the mindset of what this character was experiencing during all of this, including confronting Terry. So I really loved this episode. It was fabulous.
Yes, very. The performances in this series are excellent. Ben Mendelsohn, who's been doing great work for quite a while now. He's been in a lot of different TV programs as well as movies, and he's probably the perfect person to play this part, I could say. And this episode is a huge turning point, but you can say that about a lot of the episodes, right? Are huge turning points. But I think that this is where the storyline gets really, when you really start to understand kind of what's going on, not in totality, but what kind of story this is, in case you hadn't figured it out already. So
I love his line. There's a line that he says in this episode, which is basically, I have no tolerance for the unexplained, I think. And I love that because it sort of encapsulates everything that you need to know about him. It's not just, I need things to line up. It's, I have no tolerance for the unexplained or unexplainable, I think it was. And it tells you everything about Ralph, everything. And of course, we start out with totally unexplained stuff. So yeah,
his name should be Ralph Scully.
Ralph Scully, yes,
for sure, yeah. So where we left off at is the barn.
The barn.
They, the police are made aware of this barn where possibly fake Maitland hid out at, or was he the real Maitland? Hid out at, and they start to investigate what's going on in the barn. And this barn has a obviously a huge significance going forward. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, so the barn itself, again, we're going in kind of a sequential order, and both Kinte and I have both read the book, and there's a lot that's sort of unpacked to go on here, but in the series, it's the same correlation as there is in the book. It's just that the things that begin to unfold in the barn what at first seem sort of innocuous. Clearly, there's something that's happening in terms of the evidence that is brought in that they say are Terry Maitland's clothes. This is where Jack ends up having to come in, and he's already a little bit pissed off because he got called in from his leave. So he's there begrudgingly trying to investigate what might happen or what has happened. And one of the things that happens in this episode is Jack senses a kind of danger. And I feel like this is the first instance that we get that there's something happening here that everybody can sense, even when they can't see it. So when he does the shine the flashlight quickly over toward whatever it is that he thinks that he sees, it's basically there's something there and then it's gone. And I feel like that is more for us to sort of understand that whatever it is that he has seen, it's so fleeting, and yet it's dizzying in its dread, and it's he obviously feels that there's something big lurking here, which to me seems pretty important because we saw Jack, he's a hunter. He doesn't seem very flappable. He seems like he is the kind of guy who's like, hey, I'm not afraid of anything. And so for him to react that way felt very important.
Yeah, he was quite scared, and you can understand why. Going back to the book, the novel, that scene is another one of those well-written scenes.
It's terrifying.
It's very terrifying. And it's kind of weird because in that scene in the novel, it does have kind of a sensual, in a way, feel to it. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. As something caresses his back of his neck, and it's, not sensual in a good way, obviously, because we know what happens ultimately because of it. But it's in much more detail in the novel what's going on, where it's kind of for the TV series, it's something's happening to him, but it's not as pronounced, I would say.
And it seems, I think, just from the perspective of there's an entity and then there are the people interacting around whatever this entity is, it does feel like the entity is, it's not just randomly picking people out. There is I believe, a very clear pathway that it is following, which is maybe a little bit opportunistic, but certainly not opportunistic to the point where it's just using anybody. And so the level of sort of higher consciousness of intellect that's going into this almost makes it far more dreadful, because you realize that there is intent, that there is purpose behind what it's doing. It's not just randomly killing. I mean, I'm not saying a pack of wolves wouldn't also be terrifying, but a pack of wolves with sentience all of a sudden becomes next level terrifying.
Yeah, and if you're watching us, you can see that whatever touched his back of his neck left him a little surprised. Nothing that he, I'm sure, would want. So so Jack has to deal with this. So here we go.
And through this episode, we see him suffering for that even worse. And the way that we know that it's sort of communicating with him is, again, it says to him, or he says back. It's not that it says anything to him, but he says back, whatever you want. And so we know that it's got to be causing him enormous pain, enormous discomfort is not even the right word. There's got to be something really horrible happening here.
Yes. Now, I want to this next part that I'm going to talk about, we're going to go into some novel stuff as it relates to the TV show. Of course, we're not going to spoil it, but so Stephen King wrote a book series, as we talked about in the book review of The Outsider, called the Bill Hodges trilogy.
Right.
Those 3 books are Mr. Mercedes, Finders Keepers, and End of Watch. In those 3 books, there's a character named Holly Gibney. Holly Gibney is an eccentric person, someone who's may be high functioning autistic, as you said in that episode, and she is very OCD, a very strange bird. Okay, Holly Gibney is Caucasian in the book. They have changed her character into a Black female. There is a TV series called Mr. Mercedes, and it has her character in it, and she's played by a white woman, which is like the book. So they changed the character, as race. And it's played by Cynthia Erivo, who recently just was nominated for Academy Award for the movie Harriet.
Right.
Who's she's a very good actor. So let me put her up on the screen. She is now inhabiting the character of Holly Gibney, who was a main character in the Bill Hodges trilogy. And for fans of that trilogy of books, she's people are pretty excited to have her character be in this world as well.
In terms of question mark, why did they decide to use her as an actress instead of someone else? I have to say that I don't know if every actor, I don't know if everyone can pull off what she's able to pull off, because it is definitely a very specific set of mannerisms that have to be communicated in a way that the audience will both understand her and yet also have this sense of why it feels so strange to have conversations with her. And I'm not sure that every other actor could pull that off. So I feel like they made an extraordinary choice in her, because she just it permeates from her how well developed the character actually is, and yet at the same time why people have such a difficult time with interactions with her.
Right. Yeah, she's a strange bird, at the least.
Very, very.
So and
I love her, though, by the way. I just absolutely love her.
Yeah, no, she's as a character, she's very good. I don't know if I would like the person in real life, so I don't know if I could deal with that craziness. Okay, so give me a second as I okay, so I want to bring up this character because it's very important to overall what we're talking about. Here we go. This character is Hostetler, I believe. Hostetler. And they show this character, he's in prison, and it looks like that he's a child murderer as well. And he's being threatened in prison for being such. And this is straight from the book as well, this character, which ties everything together, or ties this together. Without, I guess, because we want to keep everything focused to this specific episode. And I believe he's white in the book. So
I think so too.
Yeah, he's Caucasian, and the people in the book, it's a white guy, and he is accused of killing 2 white girls, the Howard twins, In this one, he's a black guy and he's accused of killing two black girls called the Williams sisters, which is interesting. The Williams sisters. But
Mhm.
but speak to this character and how he fits in to the overall story.
Well, I think that it's best if we don't say too much until possibly the next episode. But what I will say is that this character plays a very integral part in how Holly is able to create her narrative hypothesis of what may be happening. And without this character, we are definitely more in the dark than without him. Also, the other thing about this character that is very interesting is this character is clearly dealing with things very differently than some of the other characters. We recognize that, like Terry, he was probably falsely accused. And how is he dealing with that? Well, certainly he didn't have an alibi, or the alibi that he had wasn't strong enough to get him exonerated. And yet at the same time, he's very aware of what might be happening. And then we remember that the whole piece together with him, that the whole piece together in terms of how we are supposed to be looking at this has a lot to do with, again, an intelligent, opportunistic entity. And so how he plays in with this is, I think, for us, we're supposed to be thinking about how could the entity have used him as well. One of the things that's the most interesting about using him in the prison is that it gives you an idea that part of the suffering that seems to be happening here is outside of just the death or the pain that death causes. It's clearly something far more than that. Like, it's a lasting kind of pain. It's a very purposeful kind of suffering that this thing is inflicting on people.
Right. So we'll get deeper into that character as this goes along, because something significant happens with the character
Right.
at the end of the episode. So let me get around to this character, who's an addition, who wasn't in the book. He is not one of my favorite characters. This is Andy. They made him up for the book, and I think I prejudice against this guy because he was on the show House of Cards, and he was a real douchebag. And when I look at his face, I see douchebaggery. He might be a great guy. I'm just saying the character, and I just don't like this guy at all. Andy, Andy's a security guard, and he's giving Harley some information about the potential missing van, or the van.
Right. Well, this is at the barbecue. They're at the barbecue.
Oh, I'm sorry, the barbecue.
Right. In the last episode.
Right. The barbecue. My bad. Go ahead.
We're talking about pulling together the threads of where the van was seen.
Right. Yeah, my bad. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to call that.
So I'm getting the book and the TV show.
I know, and it does get confusing because there were a number of fairly significant changes in terms of the adaptation, which, although I don't believe that they changed the story in its entire scope, they do change the narrative significantly enough so that you almost need to kind of chart out where the characters are and what they have done, because it is significantly different. And, I'll say this about Andy. I didn't like him at first. I thought perhaps that he was maybe even some kind of predator himself, but he grew on me. He really did grow on me.
Oh no, he hasn't grown on me. I can't stand it.
Oh, sorry.
I hope something
like him.
happens with this character. That's really bad. No, I'm not a fan. One thing that's a significant change is she starts her story out in Ohio. They don't
Right.
see her in person, whereas in this, they meet her face to face and then send her out. Well, I guess I kind of jumped the gun, but so that is something that's pretty different in this. And one thing that the book does that this doesn't really do is she's constantly referencing in the book. This is Holly's character, her relationship with her relationship as far as her mentor Bill Hodges. She's constantly what would Bill Hodges
Right.
do? Bill Hodges this. I mean, it is over and over. It's pretty annoying actually. Like at first I get it, but after a while, it's like she says it over and over and over. Bill Hodges wouldn't have done that.
But I think
You
in
know,
some ways, see, I think in some ways what you're not taking into consideration, and I mean I could be wrong, but tell me if I'm wrong. What is happening in the book is this is Stephen King's way of narrating her OCD. That is her brain gets so hyper fixed on something that it can't escape it, and so every new thing that happens, her brain still goes back to that rut, and that I think is more it lends itself more into the narrative style of actual writing than it would have if we were to have had that adapted. Because I get it. I do totally understand where that is coming from. And I know why it's annoying, but people that have OCD, that is what they do. They just continually get stuck in the same rut over and over and over again.
it's still annoying.
I hear it.
Whether
I
that's
hear
what
you.
they do or not, it's just like Bill Hodges. It's just like it's. So, I'm glad they don't do that in this because it was annoying. I mean, but
It wouldn't have made sense in the series. It wouldn't have made sense to do it in the series because we already have enough visual clues of her OCD in the series.
right. Another relationship that is kind of formed in a way is the wives. Terry Maitland's wife, Glory, and also Jenny. Is it Janine? I'm sorry. Jenny. I'm sorry.
Jenny.
Anderson.
Yes.
And they start to kind of have a relationship, someone to kind of lean on. One thing that's really good about Jeannie Anderson is she's the wife, but she also is someone, a confidant, someone that Ralph Anderson leans on and for support and help. And he really, listens to her and her ideas and stuff. And she starts to reach out to Glory Maitland. And so I think that this is something that is sorry, my stupid phone. I think this is something that is interesting, that the kind of relationship, because there's still, she has a lot of hate and anger, and that's Glory to Ralph Anderson, her husband, but Jeannie, I'm sorry, decides to, what, I'm going to push through that and really make a connection there.
She that particular character is something perhaps I mean it's interesting because storytelling has all kinds of character tropes, right? And she sort of fits two separate tropes inside of this particular story. One, she acts as a bridge between Glory and Ralph, and sort of Glory and maybe the rest of even the town. She definitely has that sense about her. Like, okay, look, I understand how difficult this is, and I'm here without judgment to ask you, how can I help? What can I do? Where can I fit into all of this? But with Ralph, she acts more like almost like a mentor, not because she knows more about crime or detective work, but because she's always there to kind of reel him back in. Did you eat? Do you need to sleep? The kinds of things that clearly Ralph is completely so absorbed with everything else that he's not paying attention to. And she also acts for Ralph as a kind of sounding board for our dialogue that is important because Ralph keeps to himself so much. He's not the kind of person who has a lot of exposition. He just doesn't have that kind of character that would allow him to go talk about all of these things. But with his wife, he's so comfortable that we get to hear some of his inner monologue through dialogue between the two of them.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's very well done in this, is that interplay between the two of them. You can really see they're close, even though, like we said, they're going through it. They're going through it. One is dealing with the Terry Maitland case, but of course they're still reeling from the death of their child.
Right.
So, another thing that's brought in from the novel is this encounter. Holly Gibney, who starts her investigation, she goes to Terry Maitland's father's what would you call
Senior
it?
home.
Senior home. Thank you.
Right.
He has what do you call it? Dementia.
Mm-hmm.
And so she goes to try to have a conversation with Terry Maitland's father, and is rebuffed by the person who the
receptionist.
Receptionist. Thank you. I didn't get much sleep last night, so please forgive me, everybody. The receptionist, and I mean, she gets rebuffed big time, because the receptionist believes that she is a reporter, and there's been a bunch of reporters that have been trying to come and talk to Terry, and this is straight from the novel as well. And I mean, I guess she could have just said, "I'm a private investigator," or "I'm working with the family," or something like that, but she kind of doesn't really do that. So
I think that there's a misunderstanding right up front, and again, this is all about both Holly and the story. So the receptionist immediately perceives Holly as a reporter, or somebody who's trying to dig into something that the receptionist clearly has a strong feeling about. And what I think happens is Holly is immediately put on the defensive, so much so that it's not that she couldn't, say, hey, I'm a private investigator and all that. It's that the act of being confronted in such a way and given this new information that she didn't expect is a little bit overwhelming. She has to go and process it before she can think about what to do next.
Yeah. So, but this, once again, like, this is something straight from the novel where this actually happened. So
can we double back for a second?
Sure, of course.
I want to double back to something that happened in the barn, because it's funny when we talk about this show being a slow burn. It's not that it isn't sort of in your face with a lot of stuff that's happening. There is so much that's happening, especially in this episode. One of the clues that they get is that Terry Maitland's fingerprints are everywhere, right? Inside of that barn, they're everywhere. But what they say is that the fingerprints are degraded, like that of a 90-year-old or 70-year-old, however they said it, a very older person who, has a very degraded fingerprint style, or as if the fingerprints are just very old. And that is also just a fascinating little thing that doesn't at the moment feel like, hey, maybe this might be super important. But in the grand scheme of things, all those little hints, they start to add up and become so important. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was going to, before we were going to get into the last part of it, I was going to go back to that. But no, this is a good point to go into it. So, like, it's really setting up as a whodunit procedural, and all the threads are coming through. And, so that is kind of giving you some insight into what we possibly are dealing with. And they're baffled because they don't know what, they don't understand what's going on, and they, who's going to think that this has something to do with something, otherworldly potentially or whatnot. So yeah, that's one more thing that people are, that they have come across.
And what also feels kind of relevant about that is that nobody really knows the police. They really don't know what to make of it, right? I mean, it's not like they're like, oh my God, we have to investigate this. It's like, oh, that's weird. And honestly, I feel like that is sort of, in the face of investigative forensic evidence, that feels really normal. Like, yeah, that's probably what they would say. Well, okay. I mean, certainly you can't attribute anything to a degraded fingerprint, just because it's like these are all clues just for us. They definitely are not for the characters. The characters just simply could not possibly believe what could even potentially be happening because it's just so fantastic.
Very fantastical.
Yes.
All right, so we come to the end of the episode, and unfortunately, Brother Hostetler, I'm probably saying his name wrong, commits suicide when they're coming for him. So now we have two people that we know of who are victims of whatever this doppelganger is, who lost their lives, Terry Maitland and now Heath. So speak to that.
Well, I'm sorry, rephrase that for me.
This is the second victim now.
Oh, okay.
Of the people that are accused of the crimes.
Right. It's the second victim that we know about, that we understand have been touched by whatever this entity is. Now, the reason that if I can double back to this again, the reason that I said that this was such a fascinating piece is because he actually chose to end his own life. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean that he actually had a far greater sort of understanding of what was happening, or does it mean that that the entirety of his suffering had just been so overwhelming there was just no point in going forward? I'm a little bit conflicted about the way that they chose to say this, because it does feel like it could almost go either way. It just doesn't feel like there is just one reason behind this. I mean, we know that he had that shank thing, that he was sharpening that for a long time, because we saw it, that he had it inside the book, that this was a big deal. Clearly this was a plan that he had.
Right. Well, if you think about it from his point of view, he was wrongly convicted of one of the most heinous crimes, and then he's in prison where people who are convicted of such crimes face the worst. So he started thinking about the prospects that he's not getting out. I mean, it makes sense why he might take his own life, not to live in that hell. This was the beginning of what they were going to do to him. He was just like, hey, I'm gonna just go ahead and get on out of here. So it makes sense.
Although it seemed to me that it was very coordinated. Didn't it seem that way to you?
Yeah, because I guess they wanted you to feel like he might be trying to protect himself with the shank, but then he was like, no, I'm gonna do it myself.
I'm just curious what your take was on whether or not this was sort of pre-planned by perhaps more than like maybe there was something more to it than just sort of what we see on the surface.
Yeah, I think it definitely was pre-planned. He sat there, he had a lot of time to think about it. He knew they were coming for him, and it's hell. He lives in hell, and then, well, I won't say that what I was going to say, but it might be in the spoiler territory. But yeah, I think that he, it makes sense to me.
I guess what I'm saying is, like, the so far we have this sort of pervasive theme of both grief and overwhelming suffering, and it does feel a little bit like the overwhelming suffering is not just it's multifaceted, right? I mean, we have people committing suicide. We have people that suddenly die of a heart attack. A broken heart is the way that I would classify that. We have people who are violently killed by the entity itself that we know about. But then we also have this kind of it's like peripheral suffering that seems to happen on the outside of everything. And that peripheral suffering feels like it continues to get perpetuated with every little choice that all of these characters continue to make. And what I was trying to get at was, do you think that 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 this was a culmination of a lot of suffering, or do you think that it was something more, like he thought that maybe he was in danger from the actual doppelganger?
No, I think it was a culmination of suffering. That's what I believe. But I mean, we could be wrong, but there's nothing really there to make us think that he thinks that he's in trouble with the doppelganger, or if he even knows what it is, that he may have zero knowledge. So he knows something ain't right because he knows he didn't do the crime. But I think it's just, man, they're coming to get me. I just think that's what happened.
It just felt like we spent so much time in the prison with the people, exchanging information and getting stuff communicated in order for that final scene to happen, that it just felt like, I don't know, maybe they wrongly made us feel like there was something more to that, but to me it felt like there was more to it, because it didn't just feel like it was happening at random. It felt like like everybody in the prison had something to do with it.
Right. Well, I don't know. I mean, I told you what I feel. So
Yeah.
I mean, who knows though? I mean, there's not enough there to really make a, I think they left it like that purposely. So I guess we'll never really truly know unless we run into Richard Price and just ask him.
And we can ask him. Yeah, there you go.
Right. If you're out there, Richard, hit us up. Okay, so and I'm gonna have some more to talk about Hostetler going forward. I know I'm probably saying his name wrong, but don't shoot me, people. And I just want to say that the episode ends with we see Jack Hoskins, his wound is getting worse, and it's affecting him even more so.
He says it again. He says, "I'll do whatever you want," again at the end of the episode, but this time with even more angst in there.
And that's what Jen's boyfriend say to her.
Okay, that's funny.
All right, so how can we get you on social media and all that good stuff?
You can find me on Twitter at followingbliss1, and you can find my websites at moviesmakethemeal.com and my newly created site, which is just getting ready to launch, called studiowhitewolf.com.
All right. And you can get me at Kinte F on Twitter, as well as Kinte Ferguson on Instagram. And of course, the website is indyradio.org. That's INDY radio.org. And we will be back for another episode of Talking the Outsider. And we'll get into episode 4 of the podcast. So with that said, you have a good one, and we'll be back. Peace.